primary way we thought we would address this was, in terms of capacity building, what role does a university play? And so we thought we'd have you visit the University of Pennsylvania, and we would ask questions about how a university thinks about media systems, how it thinks about media laws, how it thinks about the relationship between media and democratic government. Because to me, the most important question, which is hard to deal with, is not the law itself, but what's the relationship between media law and the development of democratic governance, etc. So, of course, I'd love to hear a few words about what surprised you about this visit, or so far, what shocked you, what was bizarre about it. And maybe Coco, you could say a few words about that, and the two of you could.
Okay.
That would be really great if you would say, we went to Washington and it was really bizarre. It was like the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. So with that, can you say a few words about this?
Okay. Everybody, good morning. My name is Coco. I'm a Vice President of Myanmar Journalist Association, also a member of Myanmar Co-Press Council. The reason why I come here is to know the media landscape of United States, and also want to share the views between the two sides and media experts. And also, we have a press council. This is just assessment of press council. Now we are drafting the media law. This is the first ever media law drafted by the media community for more than 5 decades. So we have already visited Washington. We just drive from Washington and come here. Then we will proceed to New York. Then also we will have a meeting with the other media law experts and some journalists. Of course, we have so surprised that Washington is too cold. But not only the weather, but also the weather of the media environment is also we have a very interesting and very exciting for us.
You're going to be monitored. The call is to tell you what to say here. It's the Minister of Information directing you. But I just want to say that one of the things that was exciting for me in visiting Yangon was going to your offices.
Yes.
I thought Coco is developing a daily newspaper.
Right.
And you can go into his offices and just see the computers being arranged, the people being staffed, et cetera, and it was one of the most exciting elements was seeing the idea of the press actually unfurling before your very eyes.
Yes.
So maybe you could say a word or two about the process of filing to become a daily newspaper. And I'd like to hear Tiha's remarks.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah. We do have a private-owned independent newspaper for a long time, since 1960 something. At the time, the socialist government and military government took over the power. All of the independent newspaper are shut down. Then after now more than 5 decades, we are waiting for them for the 5 decades. Then the newly elected civilian government, they said they allow us to run the daily newspaper. So up to now, we only have the weekly newspaper run by the private sector. All of the daily newspaper are run by the government, and also there are 3 groups: run by the government, run by the military, and run by the municipal governments. So three groups are running 6 newspaper. 3 newspaper from the Ministry of Information, 1 newspaper from the
daily newspaper.
Daily newspaper. 1 newspaper from the military, another 2 newspaper from Yangon Municipal and Mandalay Municipal. Now the government gave us a chance to run the daily newspaper, so they asked us to submit the license. We still need the license because of our new media law is not ready yet. So we have to apply the license from 1st February. Now, my media company, we have already applied for a daily newspaper license. Then, according to the government will allow us to publish daily newspaper from first April. That's
That's
why.
pretty soon.
Wow.
First of
Yeah.
April is pretty soon.
But I'm not ready yet.
Is anybody-
No, government ready. I'm not ready yet. Because that's why I come here. We have a lot of issues to discuss, a lot of things. But because of the system difference, running the weekly and running the daily is totally different. Also, that we have to change the mindset of our staff. They are very used to with the weeklies. That this is their life is totally different. Also, pressure is much different.
Are you the most advanced, do you think, among the people who are applying, or who you have 5 or 6 competitors applying for these daily newspapers?
Yes.
Well, actually, 15 have
15,
applied
yes,
for
15.
No, this is
license.
okay.
1,550, yes.
And is that too many? Is there agreement among them? Is there any kind of I mean, how is the community itself thinking about this question? Maybe you.
Yes.
You're actually taking a look back at all these.
We're talking about the shift to private daily newspapers, which haven't been allowed and now will be allowed for the first time. And there's a licensing procedure, which is supposed to be light-handed. Is that right?
Hopefully.
You don't know.
Hopefully.
But
Well, actually, there have been hundreds of publications in the private media, especially because two successive military regime. They have tight control over the media, broadcast, print, whatever. And the broadcast is still tightly controlled by the government, but the print media has survived, the private media has survived through monthlies and weeklies. So, and I've got 2 publications. One is a monthly, it's called Nimadana, the Business Monthly. Another one is, like him, we have a weekly newspaper called The Open News. But the number of publications last year, all these periodicals, monthlies and weeklies, are more than 360. That's a lot for a small country of 60 million people. But we're okay with the daily thing, the weekly thing and the monthly thing. But starting last year, the government started changing the policy, like relaxing the rules. We have a couple of rules which are really tight. One is what we call the 1962 Press Act, which says that all the license need to be registered with the government. At first with the Ministry of Home Affairs, like the Ministry of Interior, and then with the Ministry of Information. So, and all the license, you need a license to publish a monthly, a weekly, or a postcard, or a calendar. Any printed material needs to a publisher need to have license. And that law need to be scrapped, because we're now transforming, changing into the democratic stage, etc. So what the Press Council is doing right now is to push away that old law and come up with a new law, especially in the print media. But it's a huge task for us because the Press Council itself is a 30-member body. So 20 people from the media community nominated from among us. For example, some of you have got this little logo which says MJA. It's a new thing too. It's the first ever independent journalist body in Burma in the last 50 or 60 years. So, and both of us are vice presidents. And there are several other organizations like the Journalists Union, Journalist Network, Writers Association, Publishers Association. And all these associations are represented in the Press Council. So 20 members from among us, and 10 members were nominated by the government. So who are they? Mostly the president is the former chief justice, and there are a couple of law professors and academics, like language professors, whatever.
And poets.
Not
there a poet?
none among us.
Okay, I thought there was a poet.
Well, actually, there's a very well-known, a couple of very well-known writers.
Yeah.
One female, one male, and a few publishers, but no poet yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So the talk is to come up with a draft law which could replace the 1962 Press Act. So our idea is to come up with these most relaxed licensing process, or hopefully, eventually, no license at all. We're just pushing for just simply registration. And since last year, the government came up with a very bold step, which is to take away the censorship. So what is it like, the censorship? So it's pre-press censorship. We need to send in all our copies, like before press. For example, my monthly is at 160 pages, quite thick, colors and pictures and cartoons and features and other things. We're going to send in 30 copies. And there is a department that censors us. It's called PSRD, Press Scrutiny and Registration Department. They scrutinize us, and we need to register with that department. So we simply call it Censorship Department. So last year, the director called us in, the writers, editors, publishers, and said 48 years and 20 days of censorship is gone. That's it. That was 20th August last year. So from that point onward, we didn't need to send in our copies anymore. No pre-press censorship at all. So are we free now? Well, I gotta say we are freer because there's some sort of control over us, like the registration process, the license process, with which you need to change the license, renew the license at the end of every year. The government or the Ministry of Information or somebody may revoke your license, suspend your license, whatever. That could happen under the old law. That's why we're coming up with the new law. And
but I was going to ask, as to the daily newspapers, it's no longer a legal question in a way, but it's a practical question. Is it realistic? What do you think will really happen April 1st, for example? Will anybody be publishing a daily newspaper?
Well, actually,
are there too many people trying to publish a daily newspaper? Will there be consolidation? What kind of... I see all these lawyers helping, but they don't know how to write a newspaper. They don't know how to publish a newspaper.
But actually, I have experience with monthlies and weeklies, and also with the dailies. Because before 1988, there was this democratic uprising. Remember, in 1988 in Burma, or Myanmar now. And at the time, I was working with the government. There were 6 newspapers, daily papers, 2 English, 4 Burmese, and a couple of news agencies. I was working with the news agency thing. At first, I was with the English newspaper. All those papers are now gone. Just 3 remain. So I've got some sort of daily experience with this English paper way back in the 70s and 80s. But the thing that is coming up about the private sector daily newspaper, all over the world, the print media is on the downturn. The newspapers are getting out of business because of the broadcast media, the online media, etc. But back home in Myanmar is a new thing, a new challenge for us. We really wanted to come up with our dailies, but are going to survive in this new market.
Well, are you part of a daily that's
both
of you are?
Actually, I'm going for 2. One is a Burmese, one is an English paper. Because the English paper market will be much more smaller.
Who's financing these papers?
Well, actually,
in both of you,
yes.
In both your cases.
Yeah, in my case, I need to merge with a couple of friends. So now we are the printing company and another weekly paper. So we form a company. So we pool resources like financial resources, human resources, and then, or we hope that we will be able to compete in the market. But the challenge is that because none of us has run this kind of business, there's a huge risk about financial loss. Some may survive a few months, a few weeks, and then go out of business. And the number 15 is, I think, it's likely to increase because there are people we know who are going to do that, and they're just waiting and watching. So I think the number of licenses that will come to the media community, media market, maybe at least a couple of dozens.
Should apply the registration requirement to reduce the number of people who can compete?
Well, if they come up with that, we will protest.
Yeah.
Like we always have been.
But
I think the government came out, the Ministry of Information came up with one good idea, which is about there are only Burmese newspapers and just one English newspaper in the market back home. Those are all run by government or government departments. But the new rules for the newspapers, for the dailies, says you can publish in any language, which means you can publish in Chinese or Indian or Arabic or in ethnic languages. We've got 135 ethnic groups, small and big. And there are at least 6-7 big ethnic groups. So they may want to be able to come up with their own papers too, like in the Shan, which is a huge state in the east, or Kachin in the north where they are still fighting, or Mon, with a very old cultural background. They may come up with their own language. And actually now, one Mon language, the ethnic language, weekly paper has come up. So what we're going to see is that there will be papers, like national papers, maybe not more than a dozen or so. Some will survive this very hot 6 months or a year or so. And then what I see is that, again, let me come back to the censorship department. So with the censorship, another thing happened, which is that everything is centralized. You need to come to Rangoon. Let's say you want to publish in Mandalay, which is an old capital city from the kings of the days. It's a big city, but if you want to publish anything, like weekly, monthly, you're going to come down to Rangoon, the former capital, because the PSRD, the census office, is there. And you're going to be there every month, every week. Sometimes for the weekly, you're going to be there twice a week. So how could they operate for the censorship process and the paper back home? So it is almost impossible for people in the big cities and other cities and states and division provinces to come up with any kinds of publication, dailies or monthlies or weeklies. But with the new rule, it has been decentralized. So you don't have to come down to the censorship office in Rangoon and show the copy for censorship, no more. So there may be papers in Mandalay, the second biggest city. There may be papers in Naypyidaw, the new capital, although it's a small population, as a government seat. And then I'm seeing at least 10 or 12 major cities may come up with the dailies, mostly localized.
Well, this raises a question, maybe, Coco, you can answer this, which is, to the extent the dailies or papers will be in different languages or in ethnic groups, et cetera, given the sensitivities and the complexities, will there be increasing monitoring of those papers because of ethnic divisions or
well,
conflict,
actually,
potential
again,
for conflict?
I have to say, hopefully no. Because, and then, what about the PSRD, the department that we just mentioned? It's gone now.
Oh.
Since a couple of months ago, they scrapped the department.
Changed the name.
No more scrutiny.
They changed the name, or
The
they?
neighbor is gone. No,
Well, actually,
No,
it's
the
gone.
registration office-
really changed. Abolish this department.
Oh,
And change to the
department is
registration
gone,
and
but
copyright
of
office.
course, there are
Yeah.
some people who are still there, the former employees, but the rules have changed. It's now copyrights and registration department. No more scrutinizing at all. Maybe some people will be still employed in that department, some former information officials, but it will only be copyrights and registration, that's it. So you need to register with that department. And what we are doing with the Press Council in drafting the new law is to make the process of registration as decentralized as possible or as relaxed as possible. It shouldn't be something that the government controls.
Maybe Tita, do you want to say something about this? Tita's
Because
works
she's
at
from
the
Ministry
Ministry of
She has
Information,
some ideas.
she
I'm
represents the government in
I'm
some
from
respects.
Information and Public Relations Department and the Ministry of Information. So as the Hassel mentioned, the scrutiny board is totally abolished in August last year. And then we set up a new department, a new subdivision. It's named the Copyright Registration Subdivision. It is put under our department. So it's a subsection of our department. So the main work of this subdivision is to get copyright or they have to do copyright work. And another thing is registration. But we are not practicing online registration, so it's very easy to get registered. So in the past, we issue the license to those who we can trust in line with the policy of the then government. Now that we already release and we already flexible. We can flexible, so that no more. These are gone away. So that we are now a very practical way, and the online registrations are already done in our department. So very easy to get registered.
So, yeah, go ahead.
What's the
This
definition?
gentleman's from the AP.
I'm
So
Matt Moore. I'm with the
are you-
Associated Press.
Are we considering this on the record?
Chatham House.
Chatham House?
Chatham House rules.
They don't have Chatham House. No, just kidding.
What about to whom do you? What are the levels of trust?
Level of trust. Previous, a person who their publications is in line with the policy of the then government. So they didn't put the anti article. for against the government. They do not make against the government. The articles are in line with the government policy. So they think that these people, this publisher, we can trust. So that they issue the license at the time.
Actually,
What happens if what if somebody comes in under the new rules and had previously maybe written something that the previous government may have considered disparaging?
Well, actually, I think I could come up with it because I've been through this process.
Okay.
I couldn't get a license for 20 years because I was on the blacklist. I was not somebody the information trusted. That's it. So people who are dissidents or former activists, whoever they deem not trustworthy, will never get a license under the old law. So I couldn't get a license. Actually, when I went to the department and applied for a license way back in 1989, they said, sorry, you're on the blacklist. We can't give you a license. It's for a monthly. It's a business monthly. But the guy, he's so nice. He's a special branch police officer. Hey, I can give you an advice. Go ask your father. He got a very clean slate. He may get a license. So that sort of stuff. People, they trust me. Like, they don't trust me because I was on the blacklist. I was protesting against the government in 1988. When I applied for the license in 1989, they said, sorry, we can't give you. That sort of thing. People, they suppose you're going to do something against them. They're not going to give you a license. But with the new law and with all the changes, I think that will be gone. Because I got the license. The license for the bounty was under my father's name. And I got it under my name last year, after 21 years. So that's the beginning of the change. That's the beginning of the way they trust. I've been walking for like more than 20 years, and finally they think, okay, this guy is not really that bad. So we can give me the license.
No restriction to get license. It's very easy to get license. Not license, that's only just registration.
Yes.
And with the new law, we're pushing that there should be no license, meaning that if they give you a license, they may take it back, they may revoke the license. So there's no license in the new law we're pushing.
So I guess I'm really asking realistically what will happen. I think this is a great thing, but the question is, will there be a vibrant, realistic daily newspaper business that emerges from this? In other words, there's now the opportunity, but Coco, you are actually on the coalface, you're seeing this. Will you be able actually to publish a daily newspaper? And
Yes.
And how will you sustain it? As I say, I was very heartened by visiting your offices.
Yes, frankly speaking, we are always demanding the daily newspaper for the private sector. We're talking and asking the government for a long time. After that, the government, okay, you can publish the daily newspaper now. Then after that, also, this is most of us, we don't think government will react so rapidly. Yeah, it may take maybe another one year or maybe 6 or 7
But
months.
other people wants to get a private newspaper, so our minister decided to allow to publish the private newspaper.
But then a lot of the media group facing challenge a lot. The first, of course, financing.
Finance and price.
The financing is, the weekly newspaper only we will cost only the once a week. Mm-hmm. Now we will have the daily costs. This is we have lack of finance most, but of course then we have some strong finance backed by some countries and maybe some cronies. They are also putting the money in there, but majority of the media group lack of funding and lack of finance. The second thing is of course capacity problem, because we have only one. You may visit there. We have one universities. Mm-hmm. Then they are teaching the 3 years BA journalism course for the 3 years. I think 2 or 3 batch already graduated. But frankly speaking, the media community never recognize those students who graduate from this university, because there's two things. The curricula is totally out of date, not in line with the norm and norm, or even they're not in line with the UNESCO norm. The second thing, quality of the teacher is also the questions, because I still remember that time at the time the Ministry of Education really want to set up this course for 3-year course. We don't have the trainer and teachers. What they do is they simply recruited all the teachers from the various disciplines, department like maths teachers, physics, chemistry, they are something like that, and they have made only the 3 month training course for them. Then after that, they become the lecturer in that university. Then this is the two things. That's why those people graduate from that university are never recognized by the media industry. So for us, frankly speaking, we simply recruited other people rather than those graduates.
No, I was very moved by the fact that you are developing your own training program.
Yes.
At your newspaper.
Yeah, that's why I tell you. That's why now what we are doing. All of us, most people doing is we recruited all of the fresh comer, then make it in our newspaper house, and we make a 2 or 3 months training, in-house training for them. So we hired one trainer and also 1 month trainees, another 2 months for the in-house training, so the 3-month course. So now I have already make it the one course for 20 people already finished the trainings for the newspaper, daily newspaper. Now I'm coming, another 20 are now start under training.
So we may have some other questions about how the industry is developing. For example, on distribution, once your papers are published,
yes,
is there an adequate system of distribution? Is it controlled, and does the government control distribution?
That is I tell you what, this is the challenge. One is the finance, another one is the capacities. Lack of capacities. We cannot produce, supply and demand problem. Supply and demand. Industry need a lot of demand, but cannot supply enough. So that third one is, of course, if we run the daily newspaper, we will face in the distribution. So we have quite poor distribution network, especially the logistic problem is also the one issue, because now government is planning to publish their state newspaper to public service newspaper.
Yeah,
but they have a lot of facility than us. But they have something like a clone print in various states and regions.
Clone print,
cloning.
Well,
something like
satellite printing.
Yes, via satellites. They print.
Yeah.
Printing presses in, let's say, in big cities like Mandalay,
yes,
Kachin, etc. The government has this kind of network of printing presses.
Because they have their own satellite channel, the brokers too.
Maybe there should be a common platform for printing, or something like that. That would be interesting.
Well, actually, we think that we may be competing with the government papers too, because
maybe you could say a word. It's such an unusual idea here of a government-published free newspaper, so to speak, a public service newspaper. This is the concept which is in the law, I think, in the draft law.
Well, we don't say anything about this in the law, but in the law that we have been drafted, we just said about all papers are the same.
The other law,
the public service media.
They have two laws.
Service media would be like they would focus. I think maybe she knows more about the details about it because she's been drafted, part of the drafting process. This public service media law means it will mostly focus on the broadcast.
yes.
Of course, there will be some articles that may concern about the government publication, print media publication. But I'm not really sure about that because I've seen these government newspapers and private papers ups and downs all throughout the last 50 or so years. When we were very young, there were about 40 private daily newspapers before the government came in the mid-60s. And then they were all gone. And the government
Did you say 40?
40.
40.
But that's
In several languages like in Hindis,
In
in the 50s and up until the mid-60s. And the government started nationalizing, meaning like killing them, all of them, and just 6 survived and under the control of the government. So they've been running as the government papers for so many years. Now they're trying to transform them into public service newspaper. I don't know how they're going to do that. But the problem is that they do have a good head start. Like they have a huge network of printing presses all over the country. They have the government subsidies. We're not going to have that kind of stuff. We got to raise our own fund. We need to raise our own, or think about our own financing. But I don't know much about the price of the paper would be. the government paper is selling something like 50 chats, right?
Yeah, 50 jets.
50 chats, which is like 800 chats to
street
$1.
Right.
So
Sell
the street
about
probably is
100
somewhere
chats.
around 100 chats. So something like 10 cents, 12 cents, the government papers. Will we mean that the private will be able to sell papers at 10 cents?
Yeah.
Or will it be 20 or 25? We don't know yet. We're all making all the plans and calculations and all that stuff. It's most likely somewhere around 15 to 20 cents per copy. So that'll be a big price difference.
Yeah.
And then about the printing presses, some of us, because there are some big companies, much bigger than me and much bigger than him. When you're talking about the print media, I get mine is some like two papers, something like a mid-sized company. My revenue from both the monthly and the weekly is somewhere around $250,000 per year. That's it, small. But with the paper, that could mean at least a couple of $1,000,000 at the initial investment. That'd be more money. So that's why we are pulling with our same size, like-minded people. That may be a challenge too. But with the government, they have all the printing presses and the network of distribution and the network of printing presses all over the country. So let's say I and Coco, let's say we think about, hey, let's start a printing press business in Mandalay, the next big city. And that printing press may print his paper and my paper, hopefully. But I don't think that may work because we're friends, but then we may be competing each other. So who's going first to the press? So each of us need the printing presses in Mandalay, not just in Rangoon. Rangoon is the base, the capital. So we may need to have printing presses in all those big cities so that every morning they get a paper. But when, like the weekly papers, for example, for the weekly paper to reach the Mandalay, the second biggest city, which is about 500 miles from Rangoon, it needs at least 12 to 14 hours to reach there. So it will be, the weekly paper will be a week late. But what about the daily? If it's daily a day late or 2 days late, who would read it?
Doesn't matter.
So that's
It's
going
not
to be
daily, right?
that's going to be a big challenge too. Yeah.
Very big challenge.
What are the patterns of readership? I mean, do you think that the readers are already there, ready for the daily newspapers,
Yes.
or will it be a matter
The
of...
thing is, I tell you what, another thing is, also readership is also very limited. I don't think we can extend the significant leadership for the dailies. Those people who read the weeklies will change and read the daily newspaper. You know what I mean? So there is a very limited leadership because of that. There is an influence by the other media. So I think that all the print newspaper or weekly paper or daily paper, most people from the cities only they read. For the urban areas and rural area, they prefer to watch television program and listen to the radio rather than reading the newspaper. So you may know 80% of our people are living in the rural area. So only about 20% are living in the cities. So we have 60 million people. 60 million people. But so you know what about the image?
Yeah, a bit over 100.
The highest circulations is
Among the weeklies.
among the weekly is only
A bit over 100,000
100,000
copies
100,000 copies.
per week.
We are 60 million. The higher circulation, 100,000 copies only. This is also, we have to share the readership among the dailies. Also another thing, advertisements. All of the daily newspaper, all of the paper, not only weekly or dailies, they have to rely on the advertisements, not from the copy sellings. So this is also, the advertising also have a very limited advertising because of
advertising.
yeah, advertising because
Revenue, yeah.
because you know why we are now start inviting foreign direct investment. So Myanmar economy is also not so well at this
Is the
time.
tradition always to have a morning release of a daily paper as opposed to... has anyone thought about having an evening paper so that you can publish in the morning?
One evening
we already
paper.
have
One
two
evening
evening papers, like the city council,
Municipal
the municipal
government.
council, have one evening paper in another one in Mandalay, and the rest are morning and dailies. But with the circulation of the daily papers that are already existing, like the government papers, what about them? So there are two Burmese papers, both have more than 200,000 circulation. both Burmese. Well, of course, English, because it's a limited audience, is much less than Burmese daily. So,
1.7
somewhere around 200,000. But the problem again is that it's not just the readership, because we've got 60 million people, and what about 10%, 5 million people? The thing is that just what Mr. Moran mentioned is logistic and distribution. How could we reach those hundreds of thousands or millions of people every morning? That could be the big challenge. If we could reach them every morning, they may read it, because it's much cheaper than the weeklies. When you're talking about the weeklies and the circulation of about 100,000, the newsstand price for most of the daily is somewhere around 50 or 500 charts or 600 charts, which is something like 60, 70 cents per copy. But the daily will be much cheaper, which could mean that hopefully higher readership. But then again, the challenge is to reach them every morning.
Maybe you should say a word about the competition from broadcasting, because broadcasting will also transform in some ways, or might not transform. That is, will satellite broadcasting, will news increase on and become more reliable on television and radio? What will be the sources? What will be the competition from broadcasting, and how? And is it more likely that the broadcasting sector will expand than the newspaper sector will expand?
Sure.
Well, actually, the broadcasting, she's also in control of, not control, in the process of drafting the broadcast law.
Yeah.
So it will get much more relaxed.
Wait, let Tita go ahead.
We have a
please.
plan to extend the FM radio stations and also the community radio stations in near future. Not only in Myanmar language, but also in the ethnic minority languages.
I think after the broadcast law,
After the broadcast laws, there will be a private broadcaster.
But do you think that the pace of change will be faster on the broadcasting side or on the press side? In other words, if I'm going to look for my daily news in a year,
press will be
the press. It's in terms of reach, the broadcast media they have millions of audience. For example, the VOA, which is based in DC, has 5 million listeners every single night. Okay, because it's a shortwave radio, very cheap. Okay. But the problem is that what about the news? The news, daily newspapers, the government paper and the government news broadcast. The broadcast media, I have to be frank, is still totally controlled by the government. So the news contents may be totally different from us. For example, with the daily newspaper and the weekly papers, we're competing, not really competing, but that in terms of contents, total contrast. So people prefer these kind of private sector news stories because we're much more open. The government have their own limitations and restraint, etc. So that would be the story. They're trying to be more attractive, but then still a bit dull.
it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
But we don't think that the competition from the broadcast in terms of news story will be imminent. Like maybe they will have to change for at least a few years. But for the print media, we could start with the truly private papers in a couple of months.
Deborah.
So I'm faculty here. I study media primarily in Africa, and some of the research I'm doing now is focused on partisan media. And I guess my question is, to what extent is there a worry about some of the newspapers, or if you have private broadcast, taking on inflammatory tones, favoring partisanship, favoring perhaps ethnic groups or religious groups? So part of the worry is motivated by a lot of the things that you were talking about in terms of the financial concerns. So within Africa, because newspapers or radio stations are hard to sustain, you have the ones that survive are those that work at a loss but are influenced by, owned by, and favorable towards politicians, and that's why they keep them running. Or that in order to gain a readership or an audience, newspapers or radio stations take on more sensationalist tones that will capture attention and audience. So to what extent is that a concern within, as your sort of private media is bubbling up, is there concern that there will take on these sort of polarized, inflammatory, potentially dangerous tones in terms of the political system?
Well, actually, there may be some partisan papers because there are two big political parties. One is the state party, the USDP, and the opposition we simply call the lady outside city party, they are coming up with a daily paper too. So the two big political parties, it's most likely they're going to have their own paper, so mostly partisan things. But what we're really concerned about is that there are some paper which may go really sensational, like tabloids. That may happen too, it's just natural. But then there may be some really serious paper which have much more concern for our ethics and much more balanced stories. So I guess that may be wrong, but my guesstimate is that in a few months there will be at least a couple of dozen newspapers, daily papers in Burma, with different range of concern and interest and attraction.
Let me ask a question. What are your strategies for increasing readership? You've mentioned that you'll be competing with a pool of 100,000 readers that you're going to have to divide between competing new dailies. You can't sustain your business if you continue to only focus on those 100,000. So what are your real strategic approaches to trying to increase readership? And another question related to it is also one of the concerns voiced about current quality of media in your country has been its extremely local content, not enough contextualization, not enough linkages to global, international developments. Oftentimes the niche of any newspaper product is its local content, and yet in your context, this has been voiced as a criticism. Would you continue to localize, or would you take a different approach in order to attract
most
readership?
of the weekly papers, let's take a look about the private media again. The weekly papers are quite various themes, okay? But most have at least a few pages devoted to international stories. Like for my paper, I have 3 pages devoted to the international story, plus a couple of others features on global issues, like maybe talking about environmental issues, or maybe talking about what's happening in Libya, or what about the new prime minister in Japan, etc. So we do have some sort of international contents in the local papers, but some are quite focused on some theme. But in terms of readership, I don't think the total is 100,000 people. For example, my monthly, at the peak time, my circulation was just 26,000 per month. That's it. So is that the readership? No. We had a survey. A friend of mine, he's running a media company, research company. So he did some sort of research and came up with the number 500,000 readers. What?
He's a good friend.
26,000
That's a good
friend. 500,000
I would like a
readers?
friend like that.
Yeah. No, it's not just a friend, but I was asking, how did you do that? Because remember, it was in the 80s and 90s. And then in those days, people are really poor. So my copy is somewhere around, in those days, somewhere around 500 charts.
Yeah.
About $50. But it's still very expensive for most of the readers. But we have a very good system in Burma, which is about the bookstore, where you can hire a copy for a day or two and pay a price. So the shelf life for my copies on those bookshops where you can hire, it's like 20 days, not a month. So it could reach 20 people. One copy could reach 20 people. It would go to 20 households, but they pay only 10% of the price. And it's good business for the people who run those businesses. So through that kind of stuff, that's how the number came up. Yeah, so 20 multiplied by 26,000 is like 500,000. But that means that there are hundreds of thousands of people, not just 100,000 people who are willing to read, pay for it if the price is right. So that's 2 things. The price should be right, and we should reach them timely in the morning. That could be a challenge.
So we're going to, by the way, I'm not even sure how much time we don't have that much time. And we also have lunch, but I want to talk a little bit more, unless we have to break for lunch.
No, lunch is
okay. And I'm going to call it, Jacques, I want you to describe a little bit about what you do. And you can have, Bill Simmering is going to say a word, and then I'll ask you to say something. Is that okay?
What part of what I do
and I maybe go into how you relate, I think one of the things is, this is about how does a university function along these kinds of questions. What kind of questions do academics raise that might be of use to people here? And what you do in China and what you do in China would be useful.
Yeah, what Gobin does in China is a lot more relevant to this than what I do, but I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I'm primarily at the law school, and one of the things we've been doing a lot on lately with guests from China, both students and faculty is working through this question of what you do in a system that does not yet have in the Chinese case, a meaningful democracy. In Burma's case, a well-consolidated long-term democracy would be the comparison. What mechanisms are there for providing a degree of transparency, and particularly for holding governments that have some pretty nasty authoritarian histories to account? So, and one of the things that's come out of a lot of these discussions is the complex relationship between accountability and input, which are very different things. And you see different governments, in the Chinese case certainly has its own pattern of a great deal more comfort with accountability and transparency than with actual rights to input. And that if you can have relatively atomized accountability by people raising discrete complaints that are responded to in a discretionary way, rather than sort of class action suits, massive litigation, or something like that, that's a little more saleable. And that if you have discretionary input, sort of rights to be heard rather than rights actually to select your leaders and your policies, that's another pattern. So that's sort of the broad framework. The media piece of it is, of course, that none of that works without the people who are either trying to bring legal claims or the people who are trying to have influence through the public notice and comment process, unless they have good information. And that's partly been a matter of media, and it's partly been a matter of freedom of information type rules. So there's a lot of interesting discussion going on that, and I think, obviously the Chinese case is very different given the transition that Burma has just gone through. But there's a lot of this shift in emphasis in a system that has not much opening for democracy toward transparency, toward rights to be heard that stop short of full-fledged legal rights or rights to influence. And as Guobin can say way more authoritatively and expertly than I can, in a controlled media environment, there have been lots of interesting experiments with ways that you get the word out to what in the Chinese case is a voracious readership, and people who really want to see stuff and are willing to pay for it. There, the problem is not so much that side, but it's much
it's not
the
demand
supply
side,
the ability to provide supply. And there you see things like people putting up things they know are going to be taken down and censored, so that people can do the screenshot and work around people who do have computers that work around various firewalls. So you've seen this kind of guerrilla tactic, as it were, for getting around what's still a fairly tough censorship screen. The other thing that I think may be a little more relevant to the experience you're about to face is there is this strange history which I don't fully understand and I haven't seen anybody really work out. It's a mysterious process by which highly innovative and highly envelope-pushing periodicals or publications will emerge for a little while, do some things, and then sometimes get slapped down, but it shows up someplace else. So if you go through the 30 years of reform history, you'll see at each moment there seems to be one or two media outlets that are the courageous ones that draw an incredible amount of attention, and then they either get shut down or they fade out, but some of the same people pop up someplace else. So there always seems to be somewhere in the vast and complicated landscape someone pushing the envelope. So it's World Economic Herald back in the 80s, it's been the Nantang Southern Weekend lately, and Caijing, the finance magazine, and its successor. So there's all these kind of little prairie fires erupting all over the place.
Guobin, do you want to add to this?
Sure. My name is Guobin Yang. I'm on the faculty here at Annenberg. My work mainly has been in the area of new media, really, internet, especially internet for citizen activism in China. But China's media scene, as Jacques has said, really has been quite very interesting case for a variety of reasons. I think one of the issues that we've been talking about is about financing government control. And the Chinese government seems to have sort of implemented quite a successful strategy of letting the major news channels, television, newspapers, commercialize. That you have to survive on your own. There is still, government subsidy, but mostly they have to survive on their own. And at the same time, they still have to be under government control. And it seems to be successful so far. And part of the strategy, I think, is to basically to build, several very large news groups, right, in several regions. But then within each news group, there will be official newspapers which will focus on official news, but there will be also metropolitans, evenings, mornings, and so on, which will cover livelihood issues, and so kind of diverse strategy. there is a quite a bit, very heavy censorship. And Jacques mentioned the recent case about Southern Weekends or Southern Weekly,
Yes.
Where editors really put up a fight against the provincial level propaganda chief directly responsible for censoring these issues. And there's always been this kind of back and forth, negotiation between professional journalists, associations, editors, individuals as well, and government authorities. So this has been a long process, and some observers would argue that there has been great deal of progress. Others would argue that there is very limited progress. It's two steps forward and one step backward. The other part of the interesting story, I think, in China, and this is a question I wanted to ask you, our guests, is about how much news is provided on the internet, because more and more in China, a lot of people actually are not reading newspapers anymore. They access news through websites, and all these commercial websites in China are very influential. Officially, many of these websites cannot generate their own news. They can only reprint official news stories from official newspapers. But still, they have all kinds of strategies of generating their own news stories, and therefore they really have attracted a lot of the audience share. So, a question I had about Burmese situation is, first of all, of course, it's about the penetration rate of the internet, and then whether or not these newspapers have websites as well that will both have the print editions, but also offer some alternative news just through the websites.
Okay, we have one of the lowest internet penetration in the world. Nice. I think 1%. It's 1%, according to the data. But you will be so surprised that last year there is a beauty contest, Miss International in Tokyo. The Myanmar sent one participant to the beauty contest. Myanmar girl won the Miss Internet, voted by the Myanmar people. Even we have only the 1% internet penetration.
What about mobile adoption? Are people getting information through even feature phones?
Okay. Let me explain about that mobile later. Because of what I'm trying to tell you is, Myanmar people are very eager to use the internet. Nowadays, social medias are very, very popular among the new generation, younger generations, especially Facebook. But China, you don't have a Facebook in China, right? China banned the Facebook.
You can't access.
China banned the Facebook.
You can't access Facebook.
Yeah, you cannot access
China
Facebook.
has its own copycat versions.
So a lot of people are reading their Facebook. Now, Facebook is not only the social media, but also the Facebook app as something like the news media. So all of the news weeklies, they have their own Facebook page. For me, personally, also I have my Facebook page, Yangon Media Group Facebook. Also, I have a yangonmedia.com website in local language. So, why people read the Facebook news are always updated. Once the news come in, we simply post in the Facebook. So people read the Facebook, and they can interact with the news with the comments. They can give us the comments. Then recently, circulation of local weekly newspaper is slightly going down a bit. All people are shocked why the circulation is gradually going down. Then I talked to some street vendors. Then they said, a lot of people already read your news in the Facebook. Why they really want to buy your newspaper?
Another thing is news articles in journals are the same because we have no censorship now. So the same news can be read in the other channels. So the number of audience all down.
So that is the one thing the internet is why we are dealing with the internet and social media. So That is the one, but we cannot get the revenue from the internet. This is just make how to attract our readers. So there is another thing that what you're asking about the mobile technology. So according to the government news, government will extend the mobile subscriptions. I think during the years up to 4 million, 4 million subscriptions. So at the time, I think the all people will read the news in the mobile. That's why he already told you that. Now in United States and all over the country, especially Europe and United States, all of the print media are falling down, and all people are goes to the online, and especially for the mobile technologies. Now we are just start dreaming of a daily newspaper. But for us, I think if our mobile subscription goes up, all of the new media organizations cannot survive the print media alone. They have to extend their new reach to the broadcast and also the mobile technologies. Also.
Does that mean that you're planning for the future in terms as you plan to publish and launch your daily editions, that you're looking down the road, if you will, to a time when internet penetration is well above?
Yeah, it goes up. Yeah, yeah.
Is
No.
Is it something that you're strategizing now to sort of have a foundation on which to build?
Yes. No, a lot of media organizations now they have a plan to extend their business in the web base, also the mobile base. Now, some of 2 or 3 local weekly newspaper you can read in the iPad and iPhone. They have already created the application and they put it in the iTunes, so you can simply download from the iTunes. So also for me, also I'm working with some local technician teams to create the IQ. There's a 2 mobile-based application. One for the iOS. This is for the Apple. Another for the Android. So we have to make it Android, both Android and also iOS.
Bill, did you forget your question?
I was just going to briefly introduce what we do. Developing Radio Partners has a comprehensive approach to helping develop local radio stations and also using SMS.
A little louder.
I work with Developing Radio Partners, and we take a comprehensive approach to developing local radio, also using SMS as a way of increasing community engagement. And we start with folks that are interested in starting a station, giving them what we call healthy station training from management, programming, fundraising. We take a 3-prong approach to sustainability, that is the strength of the station as an institution. Secondly, community engagement. And then thirdly, that would result in raising money for the station once it's strong. And then we also work with stations that are established on different content areas, such as climate change or health or governance, and offer workshops and then followed up with weekly bulletins so that the reporters have on-the-job training, if you will, and do mentoring. And then we provide stations with money for community activities.
Do you have a question?
So my question was, you have in the law, do you have agreements for, I assume you have it for public service licenses and for private and then for community stations? And if you have it for community stations, I wondered if there are limitations on power or anything like that.
These are all can be addressed in the law.
In our BSM law,
yeah.
we have a portion about public service broadcasting. And if there's someone who wants to set up the public service broadcasting or public service newspaper, and there is a council for BSM, that the council will give the technical assistance and also the other budget. If we have if there is a donor, we will share the money for this this agency. And another thing is non-commercial. this is not a public service. It's not a BSN, but this is a non-commercial broadcasting or non-commercial radio stations. It is only for a few people, the minority groups, and for example, religious organizations have set up a non-commercial, non-profit media radio station or a television station. So they will have, if they apply to the council, they will give the assistance to this non-commercial agency.
I think, let me add something about that. So their ministry drafting the broadcast law.
Yeah.
So according to the broadcast law, they may have something like National Broadcasting Council. This is the authority for all of the radio and television. So giving them the license or the checking the frequency and so on. So I think they will decide it. So they are now drafting the law. This is just a draft. After the draft come out, then a lot of debate in the parliament. So we cannot know exactly what will happen in the real law.
I think you were suggesting the importance of radio in local language and things like that. Is there a policy for that?
There will be our policy.
Yeah.
Our minister,
a second. I didn't
the council will allow anyone who want to set up the radio stations, not only in Myanmar language but also in ethnic minority languages.
Okay, we have a question here from a representative of the Times of India.
Okay, I visited the Times of India in India. Yeah.
I'm here as a Kasi fellow, but
Great.
Stand up. What is the literacy rate of Burma? Because my question is linked to that.
Yeah.
What is the
literacy percentage? Nearly 96%.
96%.
You know what? I can give you the ups and downs of the literacy. It was like 90% when we won
national language
the award. The Asian award of highest.
So now the literacy is
60%.
now the definition is different now, totally different.
See, you're saying that 1% of Burmese have access to
the internet.
The internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people told the percentage is maybe.
So we can say it's a little more than 1% or something like that. But at the same time, your newspaper circulation is coming down because you're saying that some people. So my question is there a generation of Burmese? And I'm interested in this because we can see some kind of parallel in urban India. Is there a generation of Burmese which is bypassing the newspaper? And consuming news directly through internet.
Yes, right.
Because
he's going to answer.
Yeah, because this is a double kind of a thing. Because in rural India, the interesting thing is that people are very much interested in the print media, because for the first time people are becoming literate, and since they are becoming literate, there's a huge desire to read, because it's a rites of passage for a community. You first have to become literate, then you are interested in news. Nobody in a generation of thousands of hundreds of years has access to a newspaper. So you first read the newspaper. First you read it in the vernacular language, then you read it in the English language, which is why the English newspaper is growing in a big way. What I wanted to know was whether in Burma, there are two different trends in urban Burma and rural Burma. Is rural Burma equally is bypassing a newspaper, rural Burma is consuming newspaper, but urban Burma, urban Myanmar is leaving the newspaper out and directly consuming news.
Yes, right. Yes, in terms of this urbanization, because the internet says it's somewhere around 1%. That may increasing dramatically in the next couple of years because foreign companies are coming in. But then, what about the rural people, the audience? How are they consuming the news? Through the newspapers or through the internet? Because, of course, they have no access to the internet. So, what they've been doing for the source of the news is still the radio. So we have the government-run radios, which have much more limited coverage, because this is just the government version of all things happening. But we still have these kind of so-called, we call them exile radio, which are now based in the VOA, the RFA, and the DVB, which we call the Democratic Voice of Burma, based in Oslo in Norway. They're broadcasting now, first the radio, then now television through the satellite. It's getting very popular in the rural areas. Those are the news source for those people. So we're going to compete with those broadcasts too. not just with the internet and the mobile changes.
I was going to ask this question, which is, how are you dealing with what I call an avalanche of people trying to help? So you have sources from Indonesia, the Philippines, China, the United States, Sweden, et cetera, First of all, how do you cope with all of this? And secondly, can you say a few words about different styles of, and is any what's useful in a certain way? But more, I'm interested first in the question of what are the sources of assistance, and do they say different things? Is it a cacophony? Is it how are you as receiving all of these kinds of efforts at media assistance?
Well, actually, let us take a look back again at this MJA. I do a lot of advertising. We have about 1,100 journalists membership in this association.
The biggest association, huh?
They are from not just from the Rangoon. They are from ethnic areas. Some are stringers. Some are online journalists, etc. So, how do we take all these kind of approaches and assistance from the IMS, from the Scandinavian, the Internews, from the US, etc. So, first, what we did was that we tried to establish a media resource center, something like a library with a few computers, several books, and that is a big enough space to have some small workshops, discussion, mini training, etc. So that was supported by the IMS, the International Media Support from the Scandinavian, like from Sweden and Denmark. So with that, we have held a few trainings. For example, the conflict resolution reporting. So that is done like in that center and across the country in 20 places. And there's another one like when we're discussing about the media law, the first draft of media law with our own people, that's done in that center. That's awesome. In terms of these kind of center, and we're also talking about training again, capacity building. For example, before I come over here, a couple of friends sent me an email. They were coming into Burma, one from Deutsche Welle, the Germans.
Mm-hmm. Deutsche Welle, yeah.
Another one from France. Hey, let's talk more details about capacity building and training. Sorry, I'll be away. When you're in Burma, I'll be in the States.
Uh-huh.
But we still come in touch with people. So mostly the assistance and the support comes in terms of capacity building, training, etc. But none in the terms of like direct financial support yet. But with the new FDI law, the new foreign direct investment, and then there came the new regulations. The regulations are a bit bizarre, but it looks much natural in this kind of country, which is coming from the centralized control to democratic states. It says there should be no FDI at all in local press. That's it. But if you're publishing in foreign languages, meaning Chinese or Indians or Hindis or English, that is possible. Mm-hmm. The FDI is possible. And then there should be no cross ownership in terms of FDI. If you're running newspapers and if you're going to a broadcast, for foreigners.
No cross ownership, right.
Yeah, so that is one thing that we need to consider. For example, a friend of mine who is in New York said, hey, I'll come and invest in your company. Okay, come on in. But then he got to take a look at the FDI law and the regulations in much more detail. And the ratio of investors. For example, there's just one paper which had co-ownership, a Burmese and an Australian. Maybe you have seen the Myanmar Times.
Yes.
It's a Burmese version weekly paper and English version paper. The ownership is 49-51. 49% foreign. So that person, Australian, Ross Dunkley is the name. He got 49%. The Burmese partner had 51%. That was the old game. The new game may be different because it says the ratio of partnership should be decided by the Ministry of Information. They may change it. It may be 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever. It hasn't come yet. So that's very interesting.
Drafting the bylaw for that case.
Can you say a word about the effectiveness? I am interested in the notion that there are all these competing voices on the law, for example, or competing voices on training, for example. How do you deal with this question, or is it's not a problem? The more the better. The more people who want to help, the better, et cetera, et cetera.
we want to get a training for public relations officer because it is very important to impart the information to our people.
Well, actually,
Coco, you had
what
spoken
she's
about
trying to stress is that because
Yeah.
that's why one of the reasons she and us are in the same, the two government people and two private sector journalists. The government sector has also the need for capacity building too. For example, there's been something like a crash course on PR.
Yeah.
Because I know this kind of journalism school stuff. I was at the University of Maryland, College Park, at the journalism college. So I know this kind of PR and advertising and journalism. So the government need a lot of PR training too.
Yeah.
Because they do have a couple of training courses in the last few months. With something like 10-day course for PR.
Just a week.
A week.
That's
normal.
Crash course.
They train the government staff as a PR officer just a week. A week training course.
Because they are our associates. We need to talk to them, we need to call them, and we need to have a spokesman in each ministry. And that part needs that capacity building too, not just the journalism side, the journalists. So that's why she's stressing that the government side, the Ministry of Information, because they are in charge, because she's in charge of PR department.
Yes.
And but you need to train other people in other ministries too, like Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Trade or Military or Defense. Yeah.
Coco, you were speaking before, though, about the coordination, donor coordination, so that you didn't have duplication of efforts. When are you having this meeting? With the different, like UNESCO and the US and all of the different donors.
Okay.
In March.
Yeah.
Oh, thematic workshop. What you mean is a thematic workshop?
Okay. Yeah. We have formed the thematic working group. This is a coordination with among a lot of stakeholders and among a lot of groups. One is UNESCO, the Ministry of Information, Myanmar Press Council, and also the journalist associations and also independent journalists. They have come together and work together. The aim of this committee is, this working group is to make a media development in the countries. So
not to overlap. Not to
overlap because of the thing is
the project.
The idea is coming from the Ministry of Information and UNESCO, because a lot of people a lot of nations are trying to help us. So the US, United States also want to have. So Norway also want to have. Denmark also want to have everything. But the thing is, they sometimes those 2 or 3 countries go to the same area and invest that. So some areas still need the funding. That they are lack of funding, so they want to make it balanced and try to prevent overlapping.
UNESCO is taking the lead in this. Do you think?
Yes. So we have a meeting on 3rd March, so I have to attend the meeting again because also we will have a second media development forum in May 14. So a lot of international speakers and experts will come and present the papers.
So I'd like to ask another kind of question. Maybe Deborah can help me with this, but you may not. You don't have to. Maybe other people can. A lot of this is about the structure of the newspaper industry or the media industry without thinking of its relationship to political structure. Like, for example, it wasn't clear to me that the opposition is actively engaged in drafting. For example, I haven't seen around the table someone who represents the opposition, or I haven't seen some thought about the structure of the government and its relationship to newspapers and media. Do you want to say, because I think this is the kind of question that Deborah asks in Quilbean, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, my point of view tends more to be from how citizens are reacting to this, but in Africa you had pretty dramatic, and at least initially, political liberalization and economic liberalization at the same time. And so one thing we learned was that people actually develop political attachments pretty quickly after parties are created. And the other thing is that we got this sort of massive proliferation, especially on FM radio stations as well as print, many of which were owned by, influenced by, behest of parties. And that's not necessarily a problem, but they also, many of them took on these very potentially inflammatory
or oligarchs
voices. And so I think there was a big push.
I wanted to add oligarchs.
Yes, oligarchs as well. And there was a big push by these opposition parties to provide this space, and not much attention on the part of advisors and government in terms of making sure that the level of discourse was civil and not inflammatory. And I guess I'm wondering sort of to what extent that's even on the radar screen, because it wasn't initially, and you had a big push by opposition in order to just free the space, and a big push by donors to just free up all the space without really concern about what kind of voices would emerge in that space and where the privilege for different kinds of voices would emerge.
But actually, what we see, because we had a couple of media workshops within the country, it's not just about the local people, like the government and the private sector, but we invite some foreign experts and journalists from Indonesia, from US, from Germany, etc. And we start talking about our landscape. What would be the emerging landscape? And then they are always asking about how could we help you? And then I think it was last year, 2012, January, we had a huge 3-day forum in Rangoon. And in that, like Manuel said, that we have these kind of started talking about the coordination of all these assistants coming in. So all these donors would like to be part of the picture, would like to be you, and then there should be maybe overlapping of the assistants, and there may be some lack in some areas, etc. So I think the donors, or most major donors from US and from Europe, and of course from some Asian countries, they are now trying to come up with a coordination group. And we also have this kind of a local NGO, which is very interesting. It's what we call the Local Resource Center, but it's a hub of the network of about 200 civil societies and NGOs, so that they don't overlap. Okay, you do this, I'm not going to go to another place, etc. So that's happening. So we don't really have this kind of worry about this overlapping and lacking in some areas, etc. But again, in terms of broadcast and print media, I think the government, the Ministry of Information, they have been in control for so long, and that they're relaxing the rules and relaxing their grips on us. But the print media will go first. For the broadcast media, they still need to control, maybe feel the need to control through licensing. We're fighting against the licensing in the print media, but in the sense of the broadcasting, because they also need the license, not just in terms of control and freedom of press, etc., but in terms of frequency and bandwidth, etc. So that sector may be a bit controlled. For example, now, today, in a private weekly paper, you can have a news story without any censorship. But in the broadcast media, they're still subject to censorship. Totally different kind of thing. For example, there may be a news broadcast for 15 minutes. That's pre-recorded, no live. And that is censored. So that may drag on for maybe a few more months or a couple of years until they feel that, okay, now we can let it go.
But I think the question here is, who's thinking about the health of the political system? This is about the health of the media system. Is there a separate discussion about what should the political system look like, and then how is that helped or hurt by developments in the media system, or are these separate categories of thinking?
Well, not actually, because we're not totally divorced from the political process. For example, both of us, through the Press Council and the MJA, are in touch with a couple of committees inside the lower house, which are totally media friendly. So one is Legislation and Judiciary Affairs Committee. Another one is about literature and culture. So they are trying to help us. And when we're talking about the current structure within the parliament, there are two houses, upper house and lower house, is predominantly a pro-regime party. It is predominant. But the opposition with the Aung San Suu Kyi and the Lady and other minor ethnic party is quite small. For example, there are 600 seats and about 500 belong to the government, the ruling party. So the opposition is quite small, But surprisingly, or maybe not really surprisingly,
Yes.
both committees from the lower house are predominantly pro-regime parties. But they work very closely with us, like in terms of drafting the law, or if we have any questions about what's going on in the parliament, or what about these changes there, they were willing to help us.
Can you speak to some of the recent media reports about journalists, both local and international's email addresses being hacked in Burma, and that supposedly this is the government being involved? You've talked so much about how far you've gone, but and that's not direct censorship, but to know that you might be, your email might be observed and so on.
Actually,
what do you know about that?
Kind
and
of
what effect does that have?
and intervention through the electronic media is there for so many years, but now it's quite different. For example, there's a law which we're really concerned about, but which we wouldn't be able to change because we're not working very closely. I was the opposition, but we're not working very closely with the government. But that's about the print media. But what about our online media and the electronic media? The law belongs not to her ministry, but to another ministry, which is the Ministry of Communication, not to the Ministry of Information. There's a real serious law, which is called 2004 Electronic Transaction Act, with which they could punish you, they could send you to jail for 15 years for each email. And some have already been sent to the prison through that law. So what about us? When we have, like Mr. Coco and me, we have a web version of our papers. What about us? Because would it be ruled by the Ministry of Information or would it be ruled by the Ministry of Communication? So most likely it will be both. So we're really concerned about that law. So that's why we're talking with those parliamentary committees.
Yes.
Please change that law too.
Yes.
It's not, this is not beyond our capacity, but they could help us. Please, there are some laws that would be really a big concern for us. And with the hacking, it's not just the government. The government may be monitoring some emails, or because the government is the ISP, the Internet Service Provider. But that will change because private companies are coming in. What happened recently is that a couple of the weekly papers, they were hacked. These sites were hacked. And one site is The Voice. It's a weekly paper, quite popular. And its Facebook account has been hacked. And those hackers, they put whatever they like on that Facebook account. The paper, the owner of the paper, they lost control. But that was okay after a couple of weeks through some technical assistance from our experts. And another paper was hacked, and not surprising, it will be surprising to you, the presidential office has their own website. It was hacked too. So who did that? We don't know. This kind of hacking
Gotta be
is
the Chinese. They hack everything.
yeah, there are some accusation that maybe the Chinese. You don't know, but it may be Dubai or Indonesia. Who knows? Yeah. And then we're thinking about this kind of cross-border crime, that is cyber crimes. That may be done in Beijing or Dubai or Jakarta. Who knows? And how do we deal with that? And there's a very interesting group we met back in D.C., the Freedom House people, and they have this Internet Governance Forum, where they meet from several countries, several people talking about these internet securities, hacking, etc. That's quite interesting. And this is coming to us too.
I think we would break for lunch, bring their lunch back in, and use the opportunity to continue discussion, and we'll continue it afterwards. And maybe we'll bring your lunch. You can stand up too, but if you want, we can bring your lunch to you.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll take it.
So can we have lunch and then ask questions, because I know you have a question too. So.